Hey, everybody. Are you with me when I say life can be amazing at times, but it can also be extremely challenging? I know, I've been there myself, learned some valuable life lessons along the way, and now I'm here to help you. It's no coincidence you found your way to the Relevate Podcast. I'm your host, Rena Olson, a self-proclaimed inspirer of others. Together, we're going to dive deep into raw and honest conversations with real people. My hope is that through these stories, you too will be inspired and ready to tackle whatever's holding you back or breaking your heart. Then you'll be free to live a life of purpose and true fulfillment. I promise it's possible. Let's Relevate. Hey friends, I am so glad you've joined me for this episode of the Relevate Podcast. We are diving deep to talk about a deeply troubling scourge in the U.S., drug overdose deaths, which are occurring at epidemic rates. My guest on this episode, Carolyn Bradfield, is a brilliant entrepreneur and businesswoman. She has also felt the heartbreak of losing a loved one by overdose. And in the midst of her grief, Carolyn is finding a way to move her pain into purpose. She is here today to share her and Laura's story. Carolyn Bradfield, welcome to the Relevate Podcast.
Well, thank you, Rena. I appreciate you having me as a guest.
Well, super cool to be here in this space with you. I just thank you for traveling over here and being willing to share your story. I think it's sad, but it's hopeful, and how you're using your grief and turning it into action. I just admire you so much for taking that path.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in a mill town down about 45 minutes south of the Atlanta airport, LaGrange, Georgia.
Yeah.
Sleepy little town. Back then we had one hamburger joint, a movie theater, and it was a dry county. So if anybody wanted to drink anything, it was a 40-mile round trip.
Wow.
Lester Maddox was mad at our county because we didn't vote for him for governor. So he stopped Interstate 85 in Noonan and started it back up in Alabama.
No.
And we
Serious?
That's absolutely true. And so we didn't even have an interstate coming through there for, quite a while until he left office.
That's funny. What was kind of on your heart early on?
Well, I started my business career. Well, I started my career as a school teacher. It was the best job I ever had.
Oh,
so
nice.
I taught English to middle school kids for 5 years. My take-home pay was $400 a month, so I didn't like being poor. I went back to school to get a business degree, and then got lucky enough to be hired on by General Electric Information Services. I was an email specialist before email was commercially available to the marketplace. Wow. And so from that, I recognized that I didn't want to be in a very large corporation. So I had a next kind of foray into the voice messaging service business. And then in 1991, right outside my hometown, which was kind of a mill village, the primary mill had been bought by Fruit of the Loom Farley Industries, so all these mill workers were getting ready to lose their job. And I was approached along with another person by the patriarch of West Point, Georgia, to put a conference calling business down in West Point so he could take these unemployed mill workers and put them back to work. So we founded a company called InterAct down there, grew it substantially. Today it's owned by the West Corporation. It's called Intrado, but we built it to over $1 billion in revenue.
Oh, my word.
And then past that, I stayed with them for 4 years. After that, I had a series of businesses that I founded, started, and grew. So being an entrepreneur has always been in my heart. And I was fortunate to find a business that I felt was relatively easy. And so I was able to double purpose making money with employing women, hiring young people during the downturn and the recession, teaching them an easy skill set, and then giving them a job. So that's been kind of the story of the career.
That's very cool. So when did the kids come along and the husband?
So I got married young. I was 23 years old. I had my son 8 years later. And then 2 years after that, I had my daughter. So I was 31 when I had my first kid.
Young.
Young.
Very young.
Well, young enough.
And then were you living in this area at that time?
I was living in Dallas, Texas when I had my son Ross, and then my husband got transferred to Roswell, to Atlanta, and then I had Laura here at Northside in Atlanta. So we raised them here, not in Texas.
I got you. So let's switch the conversation to your beautiful daughter, Laura.
Sure.
And tell me a little bit about her.
Well, so Laura was just like any other, really cool kid growing up. She was a Brownie Scout. We lived in a great neighborhood. Everybody knew each other. So it was back in the time you could send your kids out to play and not worry that something bad was going to happen. She went to Roswell North Elementary, was a good school kid, started playing soccer in elementary school, took to it, and did a lot of travel soccer during that time. So she was very athletic, had a lot of friends, a lot of fun activities. And then a lot of things changed for her by the time that she entered high school. So she had changed her sport. She wasn't playing soccer. She was now rowing on crew with the AJRA. Her friend base changed. I actually remarried. I divorced my first husband and remarried the year that she entered high school. So she was getting used to a new stepfather. She was in a new school. I actually moved into Brookfield Country Club neighborhood, so we changed our neighborhood, and she had a massive amount of changes during that year, which she didn't process very well. So unlike a lot of kids, she started experimenting with pot, and that cascaded into cocaine and a range of other drugs. So by the time she turned 15 years old, we had a big smoking hot problem that I was completely not educated to understand and prepared to deal with. So we tried therapeutic interventions, we tried counseling, but it got to the point where she would go missing and do very dangerous things. So on the advice and help of an educational consultant, I had her enter a wilderness therapy program in Clayton, Georgia, and then followed that up with a therapeutic boarding school where she stayed for the next year and a half and graduated actually from high school there. So,
and she was able to stabilize.
Oh yeah, I mean, she had wilderness therapy was definitely a stabilizing effect. I mean, she made a huge turn. I guess when you're in January and you're in below zero temperatures and you're in the woods for 45 days, it kind of gives you a wake up call. And in the therapeutic boarding school, because it was very isolated and kind of sequestered, it was difficult to get into trouble because you were pretty monitored. So I would say that she was stabilized, but what I did not know at the time is that she had already gone down the path of the disease of addiction. That was really not diagnosed or dealt with. And so when she had the opportunity to graduate, start school, the addiction was always there, never treated, and she didn't understand the disease. So she very quickly started using drugs in college, methamphetamine, blew out, and that engendered a whole kind of journey of other treatment that lasted, for another 10 to 11 years during that process.
God love you. I mean, my heart goes out to the parents for what they have to go through. I mean, I know it is a lonely and brutal road.
Well, it is. And, I've worked with a lot of parents subsequent to all of this, and the emotions that parents feel are pretty wide-ranging. They feel shame because the kids of their parents, of the other people that they know, are not going through the same thing. Their families likely don't understand. You're grieving what you thought your child would be doing at that point in time, dating, learning to drive a car, going to the prom, all the things that you're not going to get to do. You have an intense amount of fear when they're in a compromised situation. So if they go missing or you can't kind of put your hands on them, then there's that fear of, where are they and what's going to happen to them. So parents that are living with a child that's addicted, it is akin to being in the Gulf War and under fire all the time. So that's how we felt, and certainly other parents that I've worked with are also experiencing the same thing.
Did you have moments or periods of time where you were hopeful that she was coming out of it?
Well, when she was in therapeutic boarding school, I had no idea. She looked great, and so naively I thought, oh well, we got a cure here, right? We're good. And then after she left college, and I sought the advice of Dr. Bob Margolis here in Roswell, a friend of mine. He gave me some advice about her addiction, things that I had not yet heard from the professionals at the school. And so I committed her to the Caron Foundation up in Pennsylvania, where we got a really good baseline education and understanding of the disease. And when she was done with that program, she went over to Boulder, Colorado, to a really nice program called AIM House, which was transitional living for young adults in recovery. And so I would say from the age of 18 to 21, she was on a really good pathway. She was enrolled in college. She was in AIM House. She was receiving really good therapeutic support. I had a business with an office right out there, and so she actually worked part-time for the business. She had a number of jobs, but one of the jobs she had was just to do marketing research for us. So we had a really good understanding of how she was doing, and that was a long period of time where I was pretty hopeful about what might happen with her.
And
then, as happens with a lot of people, Laura really never galvanized her efforts around a good recovery program. She was sober, but I don't know that I really understood really what it takes to be in recovery. And so she looked good, but she wasn't doing the work that it takes to sustain health and wellness. And so she turned 21, which means that she could get into a bar legally. So she started drinking, and then that cascaded into other things. I came out to visit. I saw very clearly that she was in trouble. So I used the service of Heather Hayes, who's a interventionist here, and she was on her way back from another assignment, stopped off in Denver, and we got Laura back home. Within 24 hours, I had her apartment packed up, and she was back in Atlanta. And so after coming back to Atlanta, we had a series of being on the hamster wheel, which is I look like I'm in recovery, then I relapse. Then I go to rehab, and I look like I'm in recovery, then I relapse, and I go to rehab. So she's been in, you name a program in Atlanta, she's been there. Mar, Ridgeview, Peachford, several in North Carolina. So we never really found a situation, despite a lot of treatment, where Laura could sustain recovery and have a wellness strategy that worked for her.
And so the addiction eventually took her life.
Right. So what happened is Peachford had prescribed Suboxone for her, and she had been on Suboxone for years and years. Now, a lot of people think that's a great maintenance drug, but the downside consequence is that you can abuse it. And certainly she was in and out and abusing that drug as well. So she had some other periods of sobriety. It's not like we had extended drug use. There were several years where she was not using, but she made the decision when she turned 29 to detox off of Suboxone. She entered Ridgeview for a 2-week detox program, and the unintended downside consequence is it created a serious amount of emotional dysregulation that she couldn't manage. And she had other things going on in her life that weren't going right for her. She had been a dog groomer. She had a very high-pressure job with a brand-new center that had opened on Mansell Road. She lost that job. They were requiring her to do upward of 16 dogs a day, which is impossible for any dog groomer. She had a long-term boyfriend, pretty positive guy, that they broke up. So we had those life events between jobs, break up with a boyfriend, the emotional dysregulation of being off of Suboxone. And then she made the mistake of connecting with a pretty bad crowd out in Canton they were using meth and other things. I'm not really sure what all she was using, but so she made the decision to drive out to Colorado with one of these guys. I get a phone call out there, and she tells me, "Hey, Mom, I'm pregnant. I'm coming back to Georgia." So she comes back with this guy. I have the conversation with her that goes, "Look, I respect your right as an adult to make any decision that you want to make, as long as you respect my right as an adult to make my decisions. And so it's not my decision to raise your child, support you financially, or provide a home for you and the guy."
Do you think that was her expectation coming back?
I don't know what it was, but I was really clear about what my she obviously wanted to be close to home, and I had provided her housing, so I would assume maybe that she would expect that. But I made it really clear that, he was not welcome. And so you could tell that she never really planned to have that baby. She smoked. She was doing things that she shouldn't have. She clearly wasn't caring for herself. And so a week or so later, after she came back, she had a miscarriage, which was the week before she died. So again, more emotional dysregulation. And so the night that she overdosed, I came back from somewhere, saw her truck parked in front of the house. Some guy was in it, never met the guy. She had broken up with her boyfriend, never met this guy. So she texts me, she says, "Hey, Mom, I'm outside, I'm safe, I'm with a friend." So I call her and I said, "Okay, what's up? I met this guy, I'm out there with him, I'm going to take him back to his car. Would you like to come meet him?" And I was like, "No, it's 11 o'clock. Why don't you just take him back to his car, come on back, and we can talk in the morning." So she takes him all the way from Roswell into Woodstock, and this is now about 1:30 in the morning. They go inside the racetrack, come out. She ingested some level of methamphetamine, and it hijacked her heart, sent it into AFib. Unfortunately, the guy that she was with was too stoned on whatever to call in time. And so, although the paramedics were called, she had been without oxygen for too long. They revived her. I got a knock on the door at 4:30 in the morning from the Roswell police, and we go out to Cherokee, North Fulton, Cherokee, where she was. And it was very clear to me, in looking at the face of the poor person that was trying to explain this to me, and then looking at her, what we had. 6 months before that, a good friend of mine that I worked with, only 37 years old, had gone into AFib for no reason. So I went through that journey with his family, and so I was very educated about what I was looking at. And so 2 days later, after they finally did the CAT scan that I wanted, it was clear that she was not going to survive. Her brain had lost the capacity to tell the rest of her body what to do. So easy decision to make, that we took her off of life support. So that was, we're coming up now on 2 years, right before Christmas, December 21st. So that's how she died, which is quite unusual. Most people hear about opioid deaths and overdose and fentanyl deaths and overdose, but there's some unintended consequences of using these stimulants like methamphetamine and cocaine, that it can send your heart into AFib and kill you, and that's exactly what happened to her.
And a Narcan.
They gave her Narcan, but that's irrelevant. I mean, that Narcan does absolutely no good whatsoever. Does not do any good. So that is, so she struggled for 15 years.
Had she ever overdosed before?
No,
that you're aware of?
Never, ever. Never. Because she would have ended up in the hospital. No, she just was lucky. I mean, she did a lot of risky things. There are many times that she could have ended her life for a very bad decision. She just got, lucky. And in this particular chance, unlucky. It's, when I talk to other people, it's like you're playing Russian roulette. That gun's loaded. And so you keep pulling the trigger. At some point in time, that gun's going to go off. And that's exactly what happened to her.
Right. And from what I understand with meth, it just amps you up so much that you don't sleep for days at a time.
Methamphetamine is one of these drugs that has a terrible track record of being able to recover. So if you're really truly addicted to meth and you're in your 20s, there's like a 5% chance that you can achieve recovery because of the way that methamphetamine interacts with your brain. It basically burns the nerve endings. And so if you want to get high, you have to do more and more and more. So meth users find it incredibly difficult to recover. I don't think she was addicted to meth. I think she had used it in the past and just tried it again at the level she used it before, and it was just the wrong thing. Her tolerance for it was not there. So
I'm so sorry. And I know as a parent, you must prepare yourself. You must prepare your heart for what could happen.
You do. I mean, I've told many people along the way that, if you know anything about addiction, you've got 3 outcomes. You're going to recover, you're going to be incarcerated, or you're going to die from the disease because it progresses. And so, yes, intellectually, I understood that and have always understood it. But, nothing prepares you for the shock of getting that knock on the door at 4 a.m. and seeing that. But very quickly and intellectually, I was not one of these people. Although there was a massive parade of people in the hospital hoping for a miracle, I knew that miracle was not coming, that was not meant to be.
I'm sure we got connected on LinkedIn because we're both in the addiction and recovery field. Right. And I read your series of posts that you wrote about Laura, and they were just so beautiful. They were so touching, but they were raw and real.
Well, what I've made the commitment to do, I had a really interesting experience in the hospital that probably was a massive turning point for me. Laura had been in treatment at MAR with a young lady named Allie, and Allie was one of these people that we thought for sure would be dead. She overdosed on heroin 4 or 5 times, weighed about 95 pounds, a significant addict. And fortunately for Allie, she got sober. She was able to enter law school. In fact, she graduates on December 9th.
Oh, my God.
But she and her mother, Belinda, had come to the hospital, and Allie looked at me and she said, you and I are in a position of privilege. And so that's hard to kind of get your mind around, right? When you've got that going on around you. And I said, well, explain that to me, Allie. She said, you and I have an experience and a story that we need to share with others because nobody has walked this journey. And if we do it, then we have the potential to really help other people. And so if you read anything on my websites or any of the businesses I'm doing, I use that statement quite a bit because I've had a 15-year education to understand this and help. So when Laura died, I packed up, I retreated at my house in Florida like the next day, but then made the commitment that during the month of January, which would have been her 30th birthday at the end of the month, I was going to write a lesson from Laura every day. And it wasn't looking back and beating myself up over should I, woulda, coulda, because I had already accepted that what was. But it's what did I learn now that I'm not in the middle of the fight, and how could I take those lessons and personalize them so that you would pay attention? Mm-hmm. And so in the lessons, I would show a picture of what she was in her brownie outfit or her school dress or soccer outfit, and then take a topic and what should I have known if I had been more educated when she was 7? Right. What should I have known about the risk of addiction? What could I have done to monitor and get her help earlier? So that was really the point of those lessons. And then beyond that, I've probably written another 50, 60 of them that just take a different point of view. I'll hear something and I think, okay, well, how can I apply that to something that you would relate to so that you're paying attention to me?
Right. And one thing I've heard is it's never too young to start talking to your kids about drugs and addiction. And so many families, parents just think, I don't know how to broach the subject, so I'm just not going to talk about it.
That's not the problem. The problem is they don't think it applies to them.
There you go.
So they see that sweet little kid.
Not me.
And like, oh my God, that's never going to happen to me, right? But statistically, you go look at any government statistic, and I don't care what socioeconomic group you're in, 1 in 10 children will become addicted before they leave high school.
Oh.
So that's a huge number. So let's take Roswell High School where I live, 2,600 and some odd kids. So that would mean 260 of them have already developed the disease or will before they walk out of high school. And that's because, you've got a developing brain. You expose it to substances. It creates an overproduction of dopamine. It starts to rewire it. And then now you're off to the races. Addiction is progressive, so it may not be so terrible in the very beginning, but it gets way worse over time. In Laura's case, it was terrible from the day she started. But
it's
for
like
other
a switch.
It's like a switch that flips on. For her, so go in a room of 20 kids, and you're going to see 2 of them that will develop the disease, and so you have to equate it to diabetes. It's just no different. Parents don't understand that there are 3 or 4 markers for risk that they know are there. That's not hard to point to.
Yeah.
They have people in their family that have had the disease. So there's that genetic marker. Addiction does not switch on unless you have the gene. Same as type 1 diabetes. The second thing is the child has a difficult time in self-regulation. They're blowing hot, they're blowing cold. They just cannot seem to get to the center. A third indicator is they've had persistent adverse childhood experiences. And, people think about that, oh, they've been beaten or molested, and certainly that's true, but there could be other things. So let's look at Laura again. I remarried, I divorced, I sold a company, I started traveling, she changed her sport, she started high school, I moved to a new house. All those things were changes that she felt difficult, she couldn't adapt to them. And probably the fourth thing that people don't really pay much attention to, and that's learning differences. So the kid that has ADHD, that's struggling in school, that's getting picked on and bullied because they can't keep up, huge marker and huge predictor. So yes, you've got to start you've got to recognize the warning signs, but you've got to start talking to kids in an age-appropriate way as young as 6 and 7 years old, and lots of ways that you can prep them with knowledge. I mean, they're already in science class, right? So you might as well explain the science behind it and in a way that they can understand.
Such good information. Thank you for sharing that. So now your professional mission has changed from building technology companies to leveraging technology in service to addiction prevention and recovery. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's truly amazing that you are able to channel your grief, your energy, your expertise, your learning, and propel it forward.
Well, let me step back a little bit before we talk about our new venture, InterAct LifeLine. And I want to go back to the mid-2000s when we started a licensed wilderness therapy program in North Carolina called Phoenix Outdoor. And our goal was to do 2 things. One, to focus on substance abuse and addiction, because 85% of the kids coming through these programs have that as a problem. But also equally as important.
So let me stop. So from your experience in dealing with your daughter, then you founded this program.
I felt like that was a flaw in the way treatment was being managed. So the flaw was twofold. One, people did not recognize substance abuse and addiction. They weren't gearing their therapy to that. That was my daughter's experience. And the second thing was they were not offering any help and support to parents. And a lot of that is because people come from all over the country to attend these programs. So how do you do that?
Right.
Well, I was a technologist back then, so it's like, okay, well, this is really easy and obvious to me. We're going to create this very robust parent support program. So in any given week, our parents came to a virtual support group. They had a psychoeducational class online. They had a telehealth session with a family therapist, a telehealth session with the child's therapist, and we asked them to go to Al-Anon if that was the diagnosis. And so what we did, and the end result is we took their anxiety and all that emotion that they were feeling, and we got them back to more even so that they could make an appropriate decision on behalf of their child about what happened when our treatment program was over. So I bring that in the context of InterAct LifeLine because I've actually gone through the process of being a treatment provider. And so now fast forward to today, I've owned a technology company for the last 6.5 years. We create content and education networks for businesses. So if you buy insurance from an independent insurance agency, they may be getting information about what policies to offer, et cetera, through our portal network. That's what we do. And so I had really intended to stay on the prevention side, and I brought up a portal for that. It's still up there. But then I started thinking about the opioid crisis and people that were really in dire trouble. And I started looking at, well, why do we have this 85% relapse rate? What's the research telling us? And there were several things that popped out. Thing number one was addiction was being looked at as an acute, not a chronic disease, so they weren't getting enough treatment, right? The second thing was being connected to a good support community, which is what AA and NA does, was very critical, but oftentimes going to these live meetings had some downside consequences. And so a lot of the patients weren't doing that. They weren't doing it consistently for a lot of reasons.
Why do you say that?
Shame, embarrassment, lack of transportation. I mean, there's I can give you 18 obstacles that may be difficult for them. And it's not designed to be an idea exchange. It's designed to listen to a story and then make connections after the meeting's over with. So they weren't, so connection to community was critical. And then having family support, understanding, and education so that families knew what to do and what not to do to support someone in recovery. So we looked at all those things and we said, okay, can technology make a difference in any of those areas? And so we said, well, sure, I've got this technology, it's built out. What can I do? And we decided we would partner with treatment programs so that these treatment programs could extend care past the time that you got discharged. So as an example, you check into Ridgeview, you're there for 45 days. The patient has developed a very trusted relationship with those therapists and recovery coaches, but then you're discharged and then boom, you're gone. So what if Ridgeview could leverage this technology to use some automation to keep those clients connected to the program? Now, research will tell you if you stay connected to your rehab for 6 consecutive months after treatment, your relapse rate drops a ton. So we decided, how could we partner and offer a turnkey program to these companies, these treatment centers, to help them facilitate an aftercare program. I'd already used technology to do family support. So if I do nothing more than repeat what I did at Phoenix Outdoor, it's a game changer. It certainly changed the game in that industry. All the programs out there converted to our model, which was really gratifying. And then I sold the company. So yes, I could do that. then I'd already been serving Kennesaw State University's collegiate recovery program.
I hear amazing things.
That they are
about
well,
that.
they're the standard in the marketplace. There's 170 of these communities across the country, but Teresa Johnston and her team were really the ones that started it all, and they run the most sophisticated program out there. So we went to Teresa, who joined our board of advisors, and said,
nice.
"Hey, we want to do a whole national program for collegiate recovery." So we brought up 6 portals with different colleges, guided by her hand, and we looked at the results that they were having with their kids. Much higher graduation rate, much higher GPA, extremely low recidivism rate returning to drug use.
So can I just pause you for a minute so I can understand exactly how this works? So is the user the student, the college student?
Yes.
They're the ones who are accessing the portal.
Right. So here's how the program works. I maintain a centralized content education library.
Mm-hmm.
I bring up portals for these colleges, and I brand them, and I make them look just like, the Owls of Kennesaw, the Tide of Alabama. So they look at they look exactly the Rams in recovery at
cool.
VCU. But those portals are connected to my content library, so they get a continuous feed of education that we have curated from around the country that fuels those portals. And so they don't have to worry about providing education or content for their kids or their parents or even the community. I do that for them. And then it automates all of their processes. So it organizes their events. It organizes outreach and emails to their students and to their parents. It's got discussion forums. So it's got all of this automation that frees up their staff time so they can work more closely and serve more kids. So that's the goal. And we've been piloting this with these 6 universities for the fall with really, really great results. So our goal is to expand that nationwide come Q1 next year and deliver it to as many collegiate recovery programs as are out there, plus ones that don't know that they need it yet, like LSU.
Not naming names.
Not naming names, but Louisiana State University. Come on. No, but I mean, our goal is to.
We have a family in our community that lost a son to hazing.
Yes. Yes. I remember that, absolutely. But the point is that, you think about the number of kids that are binge drinking, using drugs.
In colleges.
Everywhere. It is everywhere. So it's not only does it help kids in recovery, which is their primary mission, but it's also an intervention service that parents can rely on to really understand when their kid's super in trouble and to take some steps to not let those tragedies happen.
Right. So if in an instance like that, where they haven't been diagnosed with an addiction, they think, I might be having a problem, so they can go to that portal and kind of begin.
Well, they can start their education. So in other words, we're curating content, meaning we're eliminating the content that's aggressively trying to get you to enroll in a treatment program or is too old or philosophically not lined up with good practices.
Because you Google addiction and what comes up, it's all
treatment
these
programs.
Programs. You can't get to any information.
Right, and we're not ready for that yet. So, so the parent whose kids...
And they might not be ready for years.
Well, they may never be ready for it, but then the question is, well, what do you do? When is it time to really intervene and pull them out, get them help, understand the social services that the college has or the collegiate recovery community? What do you do next? And so think about it as football. It's a playbook. I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to understand what it is. And then I'm going to have a playbook about what do I do? How do I help myself and my kid?
So amazing that you have this experience that was like ready to go with, you're talking about portals, like, I created a portal here and there.
Here's the way I look at the world. We don't get to pick and choose what life throws at us or what God gives us. And, I have the blessing of being able to have the insight of what I was being prepared for. So these 15 years were my education. Had I not gone through the struggles, I wouldn't have the understanding, the empathy. I couldn't put myself in that parent's shoes to really understand what they were going through. Now I can do that. And so, what was my technology career preparing me for, right? Exactly. It's just being able to stand back, look at it logically and say, all right, what process do I want to change? I want treatment programs to treat this as a chronic disease. I want them to use automation. I want them to communicate with their young people like the young people like to be communicated with. Short burst, quick, informational, text-oriented, smartphone stuff, and then take other technology that I'm not as familiar with, but I'm getting familiar with it all day long, which is these Fitbits, Apple Watches, and Garmins that you're wearing that are collecting your health information. Now what can I do with that? Well, let's take Laura. So let's assume that Laura had a Garmin watch on, and we know that she's compromised, and that data is streaming to us all along, and we see the blood oxygen and heart rate go off the charts. We just assume she's overdosing, and we send help immediately.
And you have a geo tracker that can take
we know
you
where she
right
is.
to her.
We know where she is. And we don't have to depend on the person that was with her to make a good decision. It's a flaw in our Good Samaritan law. Yeah. He's never going to get prosecuted, but if he intentionally waits too long, that's a little bit of a flaw in the whole thing. So was that intentional? Maybe. Somebody ought to take a look at that. But point is, aside from working with colleges and treatment programs, we're going to be launching a program called Safety Net, which is, all right, I'm going to wire you up. I'm going to monitor you. I'm going to geolocate you, get you to your appointments, have you check in, monitor your stress level, your sleep level, where you are, and your heart rate and blood oxygen, so that parents can breathe. I know where they are. Yeah. It's communicating their information all along, and then give them the education that they need to explain all this to themselves, their family, and their kids, so that we can just use technology for what technology is meant for. Wow. Widespread use and automation.
Wow. So is that available now?
No.
That's in the works.
No, we're having to modify our portal technology to add the texting element. And because I have your personal health information in it now, I have to be compliant with HIPAA.
Oh, yeah.
And we know what we have to do to make. And so that's in process today. We have a discussion with one of the 3 national providers that I mentioned that wants to be our provider of choice of these wearables. And so we need an education on how to extract their data using their API, get it into our technology, and interpret it for our purposes. And it's not as hard as it seems. I know it seems like that.
Right.
It's not as hard.
That's amazing.
It's not as hard as it seems, but that's the one element that I have to get right. Absolutely. I can get my education can be off. I can do I can have a bad conference call, but I cannot have a bad outcome. So I have to understand, do I run a call center? What's the range of your heart and your blood oxygen? Do I give you a tamper-proof wearable you can't cut off? What do I do? So it's a matter of looking at what those options are and making decisions about what do I want to do with it. So, for example, this discussion that we're having with one of the big wearable companies, I did not realize that their little smartwatch that's really cool monitors your stress level.
What?
It's got some algorithm in it that knows, it gives you a stress score. Okay, well, that might be important to a recovery coach or to a mom and dad.
Absolutely.
or your sleep patterns. It monitors that. Well, if you're staying up right and left at night, you're anxious, et cetera, that's another data point that I could take and interpret it in a different way. You're wearing a Fitbit, a Garmin, or an Apple, you care about the steps that you're taking and your physical, like, am I going to lose weight or whatever? I care, am I going to keep you alive? And so I have to just be very cautious about how we do that.
So I know you've heard the quote, the opposite of addiction is
recovery.
Connection.
Always connection
and recovery.
and recovery.
But it's true. You know, when someone is struggling, often they are isolating.
True.
And they're alone. And to bring in technology in this way, I think is just so exciting, and I'm just so thankful that you're spearheading this, and really excited to see where it goes.
Well, let's give people the opportunity to make connections virtually because they are already wired in. I mean, we can bitch it and moan all day long about they spend too much time on their electronics or Facebook. We can fight that; it's not going away. Why don't we just use what they use to get connected to them? So if you don't like going face to face and you're worried about who you're going to see in a meeting, then I'm cool with you doing it virtually. That works for me. If you live in a rural area and there's not a therapist available for you, a telehealth connection also works. I can tell you right now that mom and dad, any mom and dad we treated, they prefer the anonymity of a virtual discussion because they are business people, they're members of the community, and they've not gotten to the point where they're comfortable letting you know who they are.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing for us.
Well, it's a safe place to go.
Right.
I think a lot of people, especially parents, they don't know. They don't know where to even begin. So to have something so easily accessible, that's vetted, that's there when they are ready, I think it's just tremendous.
Well, I think we've got to give them a playbook, and we've done it, and it's all over our content and education, but it's not concise enough. Like, okay, let's take an online assessment. How bad is this? Well, why don't you answer some questions for me? I'm going to give you a risk score, and then I'm going to direct you to a segment of that portal that says, okay, you scored pretty high. Let's look at the things that you can do. Have you drug tested your kid? Do you really know? Have you talked to their school? Have you put spyware on their computer? Have you restricted their activities? So ask yourself a series of questions, and then start there, and then progress to the next thing. Now that I've buttoned it down a little bit, the boat's not leaking as bad as it was. Now what do I do?
I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on vaping.
Horrible thing.
Yeah.
Totally opposed.
Yeah.
There's no question. People are buying the vaping products off the street. They could be laced with just about anything. They are creating an addiction to other things. So I think anybody that thinks that that's a panacea to get you off of cigarettes needs to rethink that. They shouldn't be doing it. Right. So Juul and all these other ones that you need to go out of business is not a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I thought you'd probably say that.
Yeah. Well, I have a whole entire content catalog devoted to vaping and the dangers of vaping, and I've got a massive amount of good new content from the CDC and everybody else that says, look, here's why it's bad. Here's what's happening in your body. Let's go back to the science. What's it doing to you? And you wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to connect with the RCOs, the Recovery Community Organizations?
I have not.
So that would be a real good group for you to get connected with.
Absolutely.
So, and Bill from the Connection will be there tonight. That's an RCO in Forsyth.
Awesome.
And I think this is right in their wheelhouse with what they do in providing a place for people in recovery to come together in community, to attend a meeting, to do sober social activities. Right. Free peer coaching. So I think this would be
that may be similar to what Missy Owen's doing in Marietta. So I haven't heard that acronym, but the Davis Direction Foundation is exactly that.
It is the gold standard,
and she's doing
for
great.
RCOs.
She's doing great. I had lunch with her not that long ago and asked her about how did you get such a rocket start so quickly with funding and all the support that she has. And what I didn't know about Missy is she used to be a school counselor in Marietta. So I think she was in 4 different schools. So everybody in the community knew her. And when her son died, everybody was shocked because to them, it's like, oh my gosh, here's Missy's kid, great kid, would have never expected it. So that galvanized the community to try and help her. What I love about her program is that it makes a lot of financial sense. She's got ways to self-fund through her zone thrift store. She's got multidisciplinary things that people can do, music room, career, coffee shop, coaching, counseling. So she really has got it figured out. But I think a lot of that has to do with her counseling background. She came to the table with a good understanding of, what the power of counseling and how to do a good job. And our hope for Missy is that she takes that model and empowers people to replicate it. Yeah. I'd like to give Missy some technology to do that, and she knows that.
She's amazing. As a mother of someone who lost a child to overdose, what would you say to that person who still may be using?
My goodness, you are really, really playing with fire, and there's never been a more dangerous time than today to use at all. Drugs that you're using are laced with fentanyl. A very small amount of it can kill you. You just never know when it's going to be you that happens to. And everybody needs to understand that addiction does not get better if it's left untreated. It's a progressive disease. It only gets worse. In Laura's case, it got worse. She got more dysregulated, more incapable of helping herself. Her father, my first husband, was a profound alcoholic. When I met and married him, he was full ride scholarship to UGA. I don't know if he was valedictorian of his class, but he was right up there. Super smart guy, good looking. He could not and would not treat his addiction. And ultimately, in his 50s, he looks like he was 85 years old and shot and killed himself because the effects of the disease were so overwhelmingly negative. So if you're using, you've got to find a way to get treated so that you can slow and stop the progression of the disease. It will, you may die not from an overdose, but from the effects of it on your body in other areas, liver disease, heart disease. Laura could very easily not have taken a fatal overdose, but her heart might have been compromised in other ways that we didn't understand. So you got to stop.
Sure. And if somebody needs help and they're ready for help, what is step one?
Well, I think step one is to look at the people around you that support you and talk to them. So if you're not estranged from your family, talk to your family, let them know that you want help. Talk to other people, let them know, because oftentimes if you need help, you're probably not in the best decision-making position to go figure out how to do this by yourself. So don't try and go it alone. Go out to the community you're connected to, get advice, help, support, guidance, and then go from there. Your choices are kind of dictated about what you can afford. Exactly. So if you have insurance, if you're working, then you need to see what kind of benefits your insurance company will pay for. If not, there are plenty of no-cost or low-cost Medicaid-oriented programs. They may not be as shishi or as interesting, but some of them are really, really good at what they do. And so there's usually an option for just about anybody that wants treatment.
Right. And some people don't need to go to treatment. They are able to do it through AA or Celebrate Recovery or HA. I think it's just important to start somewhere.
Exactly. And if you're going to do that on your own, my biggest advice is with one exception, if you need detox, you've got when you're in detox, that is a really dangerous situation, especially if you're an alcoholic. So if you can get detox safely under somebody's supervision, whether you check yourself in or somebody medically supervises you, you should go there. But then right beyond that, there's a lot of education that you can empower yourself to figure out a pathway to, what does it take to be in recovery? How do you treat the disease? What does the disease mean? What do you have to do in your diet, your exercise, treating your anxiety, whatever those things are? Maybe you don't have the capacity to check in, but you sure can get connected to the internet and let us help you figure out all that out.
Yeah, definitely. So, Laura, we're sitting with us here today. What do you think she'd be saying about her mom?
She would be horrified that I'm telling all of her deep, dark secrets. That was always a big thing for her. She sometimes she would be perfectly willing to share, but other times it's like, don't tell anybody that this and this is going on. So I think she might be horrified that I was doing it, but at the same time, I think she would be ecstatic to be a partner with me. I mean, I think, I would have loved to have done this with her.
Yes.
I'm still doing it with her. It's just different. But I think she would have jumped on board. She would have been like Allie in some respects. Allie, her friend, got over the stigma of sharing her story, and so she's very public about it. And my hope is Laura would have done the same thing, because she had a lot to teach. But, fortunately, she taught it to me, and I'm a really good communicator. So I'm taking those lessons and using her education of me to do what I'm doing.
So interesting. And so brave.
I don't know that it's brave. People use that word. I just think that I feel very calm and confident about it. I don't know that it's courageous. It's just, it has to be done, and somebody might as well do it. So I've got the gifts to be able to do it. So not bravery, it's just logic.
No, it's bravery. It's bravery. So the word relevate, it's a real word that means to uplift or inspire. I know this is a very difficult topic for a lot of people to hear. But in light of that, where is the hope in our discussion and the work that you're doing?
Well, thing number one is addiction is treatable.
Yes.
It's a disease that's treatable. So as long as we know what it is, we know that you have it, we know how to treat it, right? And there are plenty of people that sustain long-term recovery and lead very healthy lives if they treat it correctly. So it's not like you're getting a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. Yeah. You're getting a diagnosis of something that you can manage and you can treat, and you can gain control over it. So I think the hope is there. I think we've got to stop looking at the opioid crisis as such an overwhelmingly devastating and complex problem that we can't deal with it. It's like eating an elephant. You eat it one bite at a time. And so this is just a bite, I'm eating, a bite over here. Other people are eating a bite over there. And before you know it, that elephant's going to get eaten, and we'll move on past that crisis, and we'll have addressed the reasons behind it. I mean, just look at the pharmaceutical companies as an example. They're pumping a bunch of money into the market. They're rehabbing their image. They're retraining doctors about they're untraining them about what they trained them to do incorrectly. We're looking at lots of different ways to manage pain so that we don't prescribe. We're getting a lot smarter. And so, it's a movement. Think about Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Oh, yes.
Nobody thought about jumping in the car with a beer or whatever. They just did it, right? And Mothers Against Drunk Driving changed our entire paradigm of how we think about this. Did. So we need to do the same thing. This needs to be a movement, and maybe it starts with mothers who are tired of having to do the heavy lifting and watch their children suffer. And so I'm very hopeful that we'll make a big impact, not just us, but a lot of good things are happening in the way that we're dealing with it.
Awesome. So tell me the name of your company again and how people can connect to learn more about it.
Sure. So the company is called InterAct LifeLine, and our website is exactly the company's name, InterActLifeline.com. In it, you will be able to see what we're doing in collegiate recovery, so you can learn about that. You can learn about what we're going to do in the treatment world, read about that. You'll learn about our safety net program that we want to launch next year. And we're looking for support. We created a nonprofit called InterAct Cares. And so if you want to donate to the nonprofit, we will take those donations and use them to defray the cost of technology to civic organizations, nonprofits, or collegiate programs that can't afford it. So that's one way you can be supportive. We're raising a round of investment. It's kind of a narrow scope of who can do that. You have to be qualified based on the standards of qualification, but we already have a lot of interest in it because we're a healthcare IT technology company. That's a hot property these days, and there's not that many of us in mental health, so we think we can be very disruptive to that industry. and refer people to us. I mean, if you know of an organization that could use our help, that we should partner with, that can lend their expertise, we're happy to have any of those conversations. And on the website, you'll be able to see those links and how to touch base with us.
Okay, that sounds great. I will also include that on the episode notes of the podcast.
Thank you.
So anything else you would like to share with my listeners?
No, I just feel I feel grateful that I've had a chance to spend this time. Hopefully people will get information out of it they'll find useful. And certainly if you go to the portals that we have, you can start your educational process and really understand, what it takes to be well and to live a healthy life. And that's my hope for everybody out there.
Well, I am inspired by Laura. She so beautiful, forever 29 and forever in our hearts. And we lift her up and celebrate her and her mom for the amazing work that you're doing in this space. Thank you so much for being here. My heart truly goes out to the families with children who struggle with addiction. As a society, we need to be leaning in and loving on these families because, like Carolyn said, the trauma felt by the family is akin to being in war. The stigma of addiction is still very real and can only begin to get better when we have difficult discussions like this, and in so doing, we become empowered and more knowledgeable. It also takes people like Carolyn Bradfield and Missy Owen and organizations like The Connection, all mentioned in this episode, who rise up in the wake of tragedy and unthinkable loss, somehow finding a way to channel some of the grief into action, helping the next wave of families and daughters and sons impacted by addiction. Thank you for listening, sharing, and subscribing to the Relevate Podcast. Together, we are stronger when we unite and agree to dialogue on these difficult issues. We are losing far too many of our loved ones to addiction, overdose deaths, and other mental health issues. I'm not okay with that, and I know you're not. Who do you know that needs a lifeline and needs to hear this conversation? Please share this episode and be there for that family or person. Take heart in knowing recovery is possible and people do get better. I'm Rena Olson, and this is Relevate.